Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm going to give it just another 30, 40 seconds or so to allow folks to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started. We've got a pretty packed agenda today. So just another 30, 40 seconds, and I'll kick us off. And welcome to folks just joining. We're waiting maybe 30 or 40 seconds to let folks filter in, and then we'll go ahead and kick off the webinar. All right, we're about a minute past. Welcome to everyone who's just joining. Let's get started. So before we jump into the main agenda today, I just want to cover a couple of quick housekeeping items. One, if you are not seeing a presentation right now, look in the Zoom interface for another tab that says Devin Michael's screen. This is a new feature where sometimes they put your presented content on a second tab. So go ahead and click that if you're not seeing my screen right now and don't see our title slide here. Two, today's webinar is going to be recorded and we'll share that content with you as a follow-up. And as we proceed through the agenda, please do feel free to put your questions into the chat at any time. Just note that you're not going to see questions submitted by the other attendees. We're going to be receiving them here on our end, and we'll save some time for a dedicated Q&A at the end of the webinar. So you'll be able to get all those great questions over to Christina. And so with that, let's get started. So some quick introductions. I'm Devin Michael, and I lead up product marketing here at Cresta. And I'm really thrilled to introduce the real star of today's discussion, Christina McAllister. Christina, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. I am a senior analyst at Forrester. I cover all sorts of things around contact center customer service, which, of course, you're interested in if you're joining today. But that's me.
Amazing. And I'm really excited to have you here, Christina, as a co-host. You truly are an expert on this space. And, I've said this before, but your perspectives on this particular topic, agent empowerment, have really guided a lot of my thinking and a lot of our thinking here at Cresta. So I'm excited to share those perspectives with our audience today. So with that, I will.
Well, you caught my favorite topic. It's very exciting.
I know it's great how those things work out sometimes. But we've put together a pretty wide-ranging agenda today, and what I'm really hoping is it will help you, our audience, walk away from this session with both some big ideas as well as some tactical direction on how to put those ideas into practice. And so we're going to follow a little bit more conversational, discussion-based format today, but we'll generally be following this agenda that's outlined here in terms of some of the big themes that are going to frame our conversation. So we're going to start off with the big picture. Why are we even here? Why should we care about this topic? And we'll explore some data that links investments in customer experience with better business performance and revenue growth and things like that. From there, we'll spend some time talking about the agent experience and some of the pitfalls that you can run into when you don't consider the agent or you underinvest in the agent. And we'll get a lot of great perspective from Christina there. Next, we're going to jump into how organizations should consider this sort of big, hairy problem of actually identifying cause and effect, and ultimately pinpointing what drives those KPIs that you care about, right? And that you really want to move the needle on before you implement more tactical AI strategies. And last but not least, we're going to talk about some of those strategies, the results that they can drive with some examples from Cresta customers, and how to ensure that they're actually successful by focusing intently and doing the right things when it comes to agent adoption. So we've got a lot to cover. Let's jump right into our first topic. And Christina, I will tee us up a little bit here, and then I want to get your perspective. So when it comes to leveraging AI in the contact center, there's really a lot of focus on cost reduction and productivity metrics, and that's kind of been historically where folks have been grounded and where a lot of, quite frankly, the good results have been to date. And these are really important, right? So we're not trying to minimize that by any means with our topics today. But one of my goals for today's discussion is to widen that lens a little bit and demonstrate the potential impact that it can have on the customer experience. And before we get into how, I want to spend a few minutes really talking about the why. Like, why should you, our audience, care about that versus just focusing on those productivity and cost reduction measures? And so this is an area, Christina, that you and I have discussed where it's pretty notoriously difficult to prove causation without a doubt. But there is a lot of research out there. And so a couple things that I've seen that were pretty eye-opening, I thought, at least from a correlation point of view, between that level of investment and focus on CX and a variety of top-line metrics came from a couple small companies you may have heard of, BCG and McKinsey, right? And in McKinsey's research, they classified companies into categories, including CX leaders and CX laggards, and they used an NPS benchmark. And they analyzed the respective performance over a several-year period and found this pretty enormous delta. The leaders experienced 2 times the overall growth of the laggards. And that was right in line with BCG as well. I think they found about 190% difference there between like their leaders
and the 190.
Group. Yeah, exactly. So, pretty big difference there. But obviously, these are like sort of very high level concepts of like being a CX leader and whatnot. So I'm wondering if you can sort of ground us a little bit further in what you've seen, in your own research or in research that Forrester has done to back that up. Is that a trend that you've seen yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So some folks online might be familiar with Forrester's CX research, specifically the CX index. The CX index that we do this every year, but it's based on data from our customer experience benchmark survey. It's at least in the US, we do it everywhere, but I have numbers for the US. It's a survey of over 100,000 consumers about their experiences with top brands, so named brands, across all the major B2C industries. So the CX index really identifies the drivers, so like the things that are influential in having the greatest impact on a customer's perception of CX quality. So was that a good quality customer experience, which we point at being impactful on customer loyalty specifically. And when we look at that kind of like the business performance part, which again, it's tough you can chart it against kind of like S&P performance, you can chart it in a number of different ways, but the way that we look at it is that we divide it into the notion of 3 types of loyalty or loyalty behaviors. So retention, of course, so like not churning, that's important. Enrichment, so a customer's willingness to spend more with a brand or enrich their services or their kind of engagement with services. This is more important for something like a utility where revenue is not like quite the same. And of course, advocacy, so the likelihood to recommend to someone else. And we run this thing every year, right? And the thing that we see is exactly the same every single time, that customers will spend more and stay longer with companies that they perceive to have higher quality customer experiences. And there's a lot, to unpack there, but that's kind of like the big thrust of CX research is really around just like loyalty matters, and it has a lot to do with business growth. Like CX has a lot to do with business growth.
Yep. And so, while correlation is not causation, I think like there's a pretty established and credible idea here, right? Yeah. We're hearing it from the BCGs and McKinseys of the world. We're hearing it from Forrester. I think it's a safe bet, and it just logically makes sense. So we don't have to spend too much more time on that. But the one place I'll just sort of take the discussion next is the scope of CX is obviously much broader than just the contact center, but clearly the contact center plays an important role, right? It is one of the only places where companies are having live synchronous discussions with their customers. And oftentimes those discussions are happening around areas of frustration or pretty important points in the business relationship where you're looking to upsell them or close them on something, right? And so given all that data that we just talked about and this sort of presumed importance of the contact center, there does seem to be a bit of maybe an overemphasis on cost cutting alone when making the right investment to improve CX and improve outcomes in the contact center can potentially provide a much higher return. So where would you say contact center leaders specifically, are under investing today in order to improve the customer experience?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the contact center, I mean, probably nobody on this webinar is going to be surprised that I say this, but a lot of companies struggle to make the leap, right? To recognize that the contact center has an impact on customer experience, but it does. Whether or not, folks, I think some folks think that CX is necessitates being like positive, but customer experience is happening in your contact center. It might be bad experience, but it's happening. And the whether you measure it or not, right? And so I talked a little bit about the notion of CX index drivers and the things that kind of impact the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the driver categories is customer service. So a number of different kind of parameters of customer service. One of them is was it easy to reach a person, or did the company answer all of my questions? That kind of thing. And our data shows that those customer service drivers are some of the most influential, if not the most influential, depending on the industry, aspects of a customer's perspective of their experience. But like you said, most contact centers are mired by the whole cost cutting reputation, the cost center reputation.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you ask to answer your question properly, if you ask where are people under investing, I would say that they are certainly over investing in cost cutting, and they're finding ways to pull more costs out of the contact center. And it makes sense because it is expensive to run a contact center. But the consequence of that, or a symptom of that, is really that they've over-indexed on automation at the expense of investing in the people in the contact center, because that is the most expensive part of the contact center, is the staff. And so there's a lot of dimensions to that underinvestment, but if they've essentially chronically underinvested in anything that would support the agent and the agent themselves, hiring programs, coaching programs, all of it, that's a gap for most companies, for many companies.
I completely agree. And, I'm going to give away that I knew the punchline was coming with the next slide here.
How did you know?
But I thought agents were going away. Aren't we just 12 or 18 months away from automating everything you could possibly ever have to contact the brands you do business with about?
It's too true. I mean, ChatGPT is here at last. The era of the agent has finally ended. And, got to take a quick look at the attendee list, make sure no one dropped off after that sentence, because they'd be very confused about this. But of course, I'm joking. This isn't a new idea. As a little kind of personal story, one of my first jobs at a school was a conversation sales for a conversational AI startup. And if you want to know the name of our best performing white paper, it was The Death of the Contact Center, and it had a tombstone and everything on the title page. And
so dramatic.
I know it did really well. And we've been at this narrative for a long time, right? We've over a decade. The tech is better now. Definitely, the tech is better now. But I don't think that the importance of the human agent has reduced at all, let alone certainly not that much. But when I hear this kind of thing, what I think about, and we've talked about this a little bit, is I wonder about the end game, right? On that strategy. Right. If we're thinking about if we follow the ChatGPT-ification of the contact center to its logical conclusion, do we never talk to our customers again? That seems short-sighted. Marketing is spending a bunch of money trying to talk to customers more. The contact center is spending a bunch of money trying to talk to customers never. And that just doesn't really line up to me. We got to think a little bit more about what are we, if we're automating more in the future, and we likely are going to, how do we then make the most out of those kinds of interactions that we do have left? We can't be wanting to throw them all out.
No, we definitely shouldn't. And I mean, it gets into, you're alluding to a point I definitely want to spend some time on later, which is we should be automating the right things and pointing humans at the right things, right? And really thinking from an outcome-based approach across that spectrum. But before we get into that specific topic, you do have some interesting research that I've seen about some of the things that make agents so critical to the customer experience in particular. So could you talk a little bit about some of those specific things? What are agents doing, thematically across organizations that really drive whether customers come away happy and loyal and all of those great business benefits we talked about or not?
Absolutely. And so again, echoing back to the notion of the CX drivers or, experience drivers in the CX index, there were three that I looked at specifically. When I first joined Forrester, I got kind of like indoctrinated into the CX index of it all. And I saw that this customer service drivers are really important. And the three that I focused on was the agent answers all of my questions. Pretty important. The company resolves my issue, my contact on the my issue on the first contact or quickly, because sometimes it's not
Right.
possible. And
Right.
the agent was had the authority to resolve an issue without escalating to a supervisor or transferring the customer. And those three things, like on their face, very operational, very standard stuff. Every contact center would say, yeah, we are focusing on doing those things, but it is not made equal. Like a lot of companies fall down in almost all of those areas. So when I think about like on the surface, they're pretty operational things, but the thing that I like to emphasize to my clients is they're also really achievable, right? Like these are all things that are easy to help improve, like to give agents the right resources to answer customer questions accurately, to optimize FCR, first contact resolution, to help give them the authority to resolve like throughout, not have to kind of like pop them across the transfer line. They're not super hard things to get right, but you do need to prioritize improving them. But those are the things that customers are literally telling us that is what matters to them almost above anything else. And it has that kind of like loyalty impact, like we were talking about.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's one reason why like intent and what your overarching like philosophical goal is so important, because if you're just thinking about cutting costs, I mean, some of those things can probably help you cut costs actually, but they're not
Right?
necessarily the things you would narrow in on immediately, right? You start to think about how do I reduce headcount versus how do I empower agents and those types of trade-offs. But I think it's really insightful that two of those three examples that you just mentioned, like the specific sort of thematic things that customers really care about, mentioned agents explicitly, right? Agents resolve
Yeah.
all my issues on the first try. Agents are empowered
Yes.
to make decisions without escalating to a supervisor, right? And like, I don't know, maybe I'm getting like a little too cute with this, but just the fact that they mention agents in this response sort of does suggest that in the areas that really matter to people's perceptions of the customer experience, the human touch is still like what they expect. They aren't even considering that like those things would all be done through automation, right? When they think about like the
No.
scenarios I
And
think about to the past that I care about, it's always like there's a human involved. I want to be talking to a human. That human just has to do right by me.
no, exactly. And I feel like sometimes we people talk a lot about customer expectations increasing and all of that kind of thing. But when we look at our data, we recently, my colleague Max and I just recently put a survey out to our internal kind of customer community. And one of them was just asking, in what scenarios would you want to speak to a person versus self-service? And self-service could have been a chatbot, could have literally just been like using the app. Like we didn't specify. And when it comes to like the easy stuff, like checking my balance, the usual suspects, like, yeah, I don't want to talk to a person about that. We shouldn't have to talk to a person about that. It's not that
Right.
customers don't like self-service, but when the things go wrong, and they will go wrong, there is a desire to have that human reassurance in some cases for certain industries, or that
Right.
human expertise, or whatever the case. But there is still that like strong desire to engage with a human being on the issues that are that come up. That we did that like 3 months ago. It was like the data's not stale.
Yep. Yep. And so I think there's like kind of a theme emerging here where we need to automate the right things. And then we also need to be intentional about how we empower agents. Like, because the topic, those things that people care about that you mentioned are sort of like they're pretty high level, big picture, and they're
Yeah.
probably made up of a lot of different sort of components and tasks and types of conversations in reality. So when you say that they're achievable, they certainly are. But what are the more tactical ways that we should think about achieving them? And so that's where I want to go next. And this is a topic that I'm definitely passionate about, and that we've talked about in the past But it's that many organizations don't have a strong understanding of what actually drives the KPIs they care about. I mean, in this case, customer satisfaction or resolution, but even if you're laser focused on cost reduction and productivity, average handle time and transfer rates and things like that. And so you have these organizations that are running expensive quality programs, and they're investing a lot of time and labor costs, honestly, in coaching and things like that. And maybe they're even maybe they're using some real-time augmentation and they're using scripting and things like that. But in so many cases, they just aren't reinforcing the right things that actually make a difference. So they're throwing money and time and resources and technology at a problem without knowing the root cause of what they're even trying to move the needle on. So I guess how prevalent of an issue is that in your experience, and what is causing it?
I mean, very prevalent, but one of the things, the easiest way I think to answer that question is to give you a bit of an anecdote from a client conversation that I had. There was a client who they were looking to automate their quality program. It's a good idea. And they did the thing that many companies won't do, and I wish that they would do, but they don't, which is to say, hey, we've had this quality scorecard for a really long time. Maybe it's time for us to double check that these things are actually aligned to the KPIs that the business cares about. In this case, let's say it's FCR and CSAT, for example. They wanted to know, okay, we're asking our agents to do 27 different things, right? We have 27 criteria on our scorecard. Let's make sure that it actually matters and it has any influence whatsoever on the things that we are measuring and we care about. And so they did the hard thing, which is to go and do the in their case, offline analysis to pair these pieces up. And they found that one out of 27 of the things that they were measuring for the last however many years had any impact whatsoever on the outcomes that they cared about. Had they not done that step, they would have automated it so that it would be speeding up and doing across all 100% of your calls the wrong things and incentivizing the wrong behaviors and measuring the wrong kind of outcomes. I mean, I've seen my fair share of scorecards, so maybe I'm a little bit of an anomaly, but I cannot tell you how many times I've seen just agent says the customer's name 3 times on the call. And I could be wrong, and I would love to be proven wrong, but I am very skeptical that that has any impact whatsoever on meaningful business outcomes. But before you go and automate it, you should probably find out. And it's hard to do that. But I mean, we've talked about this a little bit, and you guys are doing some really cool things in this area to help people more easily identify what does matter, right? I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
Super cool.
Yeah. Well, it's just funny. Before I jump into that, one, your say that the customer's name 3 times thing, that sounds like maybe a consulting project gone wrong that has lived on in company lore. That
consultant was paid big money because it's everywhere.
No, and 2, you mentioned incentivization and I think the other area that I've heard this issue come up where the root cause and the incentives are misaligned is from some of our customers, and they set a goal around let's talk about a productivity goal, average handle time, for example. They set that goal and they have BPOs that are then incentivized against this goal. And it leads to all types of bad behavior, like transferring calls that don't need to be transferred because then the individual legs have lower handle time, or, BPO agents just hanging up. And so I think this is one of those areas, beyond sort of quality and that side of it, where just performance analytics, your traditional performance analytics aren't enough without conversational data behind them to really understand what's happening in those calls with the lower handle time, or what's happening in the calls that are resolving at a higher rate. And so you alluded to this. This is an area that got really one of the things that got me really excited about joining Cresta as somebody who's been in the contact center space, and an area where I think we're really differentiated is Cresta has been invested heavily in developing what we call outcome-driven AI. And that means we're combining conversation data and KPI data together in ways that help steer our large language models, and ultimately through that steer our customers to understand cause and effect better and make better decisions and reinforce the things that actually matter. And so there's two areas that we've actually productized that are designed to do this. One, behavior discovery, and the other, outcome insights. And so I'll talk about them quickly. I won't get into all the technical details and all of that. And we'd love to the audience, we'd love to show you these things, obviously. And so you can feel free to reach out for a demo, and we'll also be reaching out to offer that to you. But at a high level, behavior discovery is designed to classify the specific things that agents are saying and doing in different situations. And so we call these behaviors. They're really sort of like thematically similar ways in which given groups of agents might be trying to solve a problem or overcome an objection or troubleshooting discovery, or even just like how they approach empathizing with the customer or building personal connection or saying the name 3 times. Like all of those things are things that when you use large language models to like actually classify behavior versus just looking at like keywords and phrases and things like that, you can start to create these groups of behaviors that are coming up and occurring either from different groups of agents or in different scenarios, right? And so we have a product or capability within our product where we use large language models to do that classification for you. And it can be done broadly, or it can narrow down into very specific contexts, like types of conversations or specific types of objections that agents are trying to overcome. Or, we can even look specifically at what a defined group of top performing agents is doing, and then see, by analog of what they're doing differently. So that's one piece of it, is like really understanding what's happening at a fundamental level in different scenarios. And then we've designed another component that bridges the gap from that to what matters, and we call that outcome insights. And so that quantifies the potential impact of those behaviors that we've discovered and we're discovering on an ongoing basis. And we quantify the impact of doing that or not doing that in a given situation, or in the situation that we're trying to require it to be done on a given outcome, like sales conversion or issue resolution, or even average handle time, right? And so those two capabilities, they're really designed to work together to pinpoint what's happening, what tactics or best practices have the highest likelihood to result in the outcome you're going for, and it's all backed by data. And so, like, to your point, a company you'd worked with or are familiar with had done something similar, looking at their QA scorecard, right? But without AI and really without large language models, like while it's technically possible, this is something that's really resource intensive, right?
And it was like they were motivated to do it, and it's exceedingly rare that a company wants to do it that way. One of the things that came to my mind as you were talking was there are things that you need your agents to say exactly the same. It's like a compliance requirement.
Sure.
That's easy to script. You can keyword the heck out of that. Nothing wrong with that. But when you start getting into the like more nuanced, like, hey, we want you to handle this objection. I handle it differently than you handle it, but we might have the same outcome. Like the outcome is what matters. But it's really hard with traditional systems that are not based on like large language models to come up with to account for all of the different ways that your 500 agents say a thing. So usually you end up coaching what I say, like, we reduce them to an automatable average. You get them down to like easy to automate, and that dilutes your highest performers, because they could be doing something differently, but they're asked not to. And like, how often are we holding agents back from outcomes that we could be realizing just because it is a pain in the butt to program out all the different ways that a person can say a thing? That's, I think, one of the biggest things that I'm excited about with like Gen AI and large language models in the contact center is not having to worry about that sort of thing.
Absolutely. I mean, it also kind of highlights a risk of like locking yourself in over the long term to things that may have worked at one point, but like now don't work anymore. Like I just keep thinking of like, say the customer's name 3 times, like maybe that did work at one point, but like
maybe it did.
Is there a better way now? We don't know, because we're requiring everyone to do that. So I think like that's a great point, and it does get into one of the things we're trying to achieve with behavior discovery is like seeing what outliers are doing, and then enabling your laggards in performance to mimic those types of things. But not being so restrictive that it's all like down to a script and the only way you
Yeah.
evaluate it is through exact execution, right? There still needs to be variability, even if we're encouraging these things. So I love that point, and the idea of the automatable average. Like getting too good at automation can actually potentially hurt you when it comes
I
to
mean,
augmenting agents.
especially when it's something like if you want to use a bot, use a bot. There's a lot of reasons not to in certain cases, but if you
Right.
have your people, you're squashing the opportunity to use their best skills, which is like being a person, and like that kind of thing, especially for sales scenarios, for kind of like really high emotional kind of connection scenarios, relationship building. You
Right.
can tell if someone's reading a script. I can tell if someone's reading a script.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why we're not doing that today to our
Yep.
audience because it's not very engaging when people do
And you
that.
can, yeah, we're
Right.
a little bit looser, which is nice,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
we don't have the scripting on today. Yeah.
No, I'm just joking around about that, obviously. But no, it's a really good point. And so I think like, yeah, I don't know. I guess where I'd go next with this is doing this type of analysis. It's been possible. It's been really
Hmm.
hard. And
Hmm.
I would posit that maybe that is why, like, historically, the focus when it comes to agent augmentation and some of the real time AI applications so far, and even like quality automation and those types of things, have been so focused on productivity and cost reduction
Oh
narrowly.
yeah.
Like, I'm not saying we shouldn't focus on those things, but just that we should focus on more than just those things. But if you don't know what matters, it is pretty hard to get beyond that. Would you agree, Christina?
There's a lot of companies that don't even transcribe their calls and give that to the supervisors, right? And so like in those cases, the only thing that supervisor is going to have is going to be hard operational metrics, right? So like they're going to have like the agent's AHT, the things that are like hard numbers that like Cisco gave you. And
Right.
when you think about that, like I've seen it from, in inquiries with clients where the supervisor starts turning into a data analyst, not a coach anymore, right? They're starting to basically be
Right.
like, well, your average handle time was a little high, like make it lower. And it's like, well, the agent obviously doesn't know how to do that. But that's not
Right.
like meaningful coaching advice. So it is the easiest thing to do, but it's not the most meaningful thing to do.
Yep. No, that makes sense. And so, I mean, I do want to just talk a little bit about a couple of results where like we've seen Cresta customers apply the technology I was just talking about,
Yeah.
combine it with other things we do like quality automation, with more targeted coaching, with real-time agent assistance and augmentation, and actually get like both sides of the coin, reduce cost, drive productivity, and improve the customer experience. And there's two examples that come to mind that are both slightly different. The first is one of our customers, Brinks Home. They were actually really focused on reducing their transfer rate, and they got
Mm-hmm.
an amazing result there where they were able to bring their transfer rate down from 30% of calls being transferred, which was really high, and
Really high.
ties in, I think, to some of those bad behaviors and misincentivization that I alluded to before, down to 8%. So like a really significant move on transfer rate. And they also saw a 5-point increase in first call resolution. And the reason I like highlighting this result is because it's one of those things that like really benefits the customer, right? We heard
Yeah.
earlier that they want their issue resolved, on the first contact, and they want agents to be able to tell them everything they need to know without transferring them around. Like customers hate being transferred around,
Oh,
especially if that's
definitely.
not a seamless experience in the transfers. But we don't need to get into that line of thinking. But to my point is, I guess that this really drives a better customer experience, but it also drives costs down pretty significantly, right? If you're reducing transfers and you're resolving things on the first call or the first contact,
Yeah.
much more frequently, you're actually shrinking your total contact volume and you're reducing your total talk time. And so I
Yeah.
feel like it's almost a more powerful metric than average handle time, even from a cost perspective, but it also has the added benefit to the customer.
They could measure an AHT and it would still be really wicked good. All right. Like but it's the like you're fixing the problem, not the symptom of the problem for sure.
Right. Right. Yeah. And then I guess the second one was focused on AHT, but
Mhm.
through putting some of these tools together, Snap Finance is the other customer that I wanted to talk about. they're using really the whole Cresta suite from insights and some of those tools that I just talked about through our QM and coaching tools, through agent assistance and even our virtual agent. So they're doing outright automation as well. But they were able to get their average handle time down by 40%. So a very significant reduction there. And, you know, I'm not going to go and overpromise that that's possible for every business, but I think like you can get to those numbers when you automate some of the right things, you focus on handle time reduction in the right areas. But what I really like about their result is they also saw a 24% increase to CSAT simultaneously. So it is possible to reduce talk time. And you know, they shared an interesting insight with us where they actually discovered that like their particular customers in a lot of cases didn't really want all this personalization that is sort of become en vogue. They just wanted to like get their issue solved quickly. And so they stripped away some of that. And this is where it comes down to like understanding what really matters and what drives your result. Stripped away that. They got the better customer satisfaction result and it reduced handle time. So like a very happy outcome on both sides of this coin, and sort of just goes to show that like productivity gains may be the prevailing focus today. But some of these advances in AI and better technology out there, and then willing customers that actually like want to think this way, they're able to accomplish both sides and get that cost reduction while also improving the customer experience. So that brings me to my next question for you, because I've been rambling on for a little too long here, I think, Christina, but you have a really interesting idea and one that resonated with me, which is the idea of time savings being a resource that contact centers can then reinvest in high value ways. So talk to me a little bit about how organizations should be thinking about that concept, and you know, what are some of those ways that they can reinvest their time savings and drive more value other than just simply, you know, cutting headcount, for example.
Yeah. So, I mean, efficiency gains in most programs, like you're saying, is almost always the outcome rather than an opportunity to invest in doing things that are really hard to automate, or maybe you don't want to automate, or maybe there's areas where if you kind of think to yourself, what would I do if I had 20% more agents? Like, what kinds of experiences would I be able to deliver? You can have 20% less kind of like strain on your agents, and you can still answer the same question. But that can be all over the place, like whether it's back office, mid office, like, you know, frontline, where if you automate quality monitoring, your folks don't have to be listening to calls manually, like listening to 2% of your calls every month. That is, call listening is so onerous, and it is a poor use of our human brains. We should be using it for much more value add, you know, kind of activities, like looking at the insights and saying, okay, especially if you have something like that, you know, behavior correlation, to say, okay, well, when Christina does this on a call, it works. Like, it has the right outcome, and that works for her. So being able to coach to that behavior and be able to like have those conversations as a person is going to drive better outcomes than just, you know, giving them the spreadsheet, telling them to check it off when they've received their quality scorecard and all that kind of thing. But on the agent side, one of the examples that I would give is, I was speaking with the chief digital officer at a health system, and they have a bit of a tricky ecosystem because the folks that are interacting with their customers or their patients, members, they're not like frontline contact center agents. Sometimes they're nurses or other kind of like healthcare admins, higher cost resources. And it is never going to happen to basically have a human touch for literally everything. And that wouldn't even be something you'd want to do. But something that they were thinking about is, how can I automate some of the routine stuff? So like an appointment reminder via SMS instead of someone literally picking up the phone to remind you. Or in their case, they're doing a voice assistant outreach for post-ER discharge calls. So after getting out of the ER, they have an automated call out so that they make sure, did you get your prescription? Did you make an appointment with your primary care provider? After all that, they are able to take their, you know, higher cost human individuals to make dedicated calls to the folks that didn't pick up their prescription, because maybe it's a cost thing, maybe it's financial, maybe it's mobility, they couldn't get to the pharmacy. Either way, they have an answer for that problem, like they have a solution. but they need to have that conversation. They wouldn't be able to have those conversations without automating some of their volume, but they're treating it as more of a capacity builder. They have
Yep.
the capacity and the kind of like room and the head count to do these kinds of outreach programs. And that's like all money for them. Like that's like a really great
Yeah.
opportunity to start building loyalty, but most companies are not thinking about it like that. It's just like, we'll just talk
Yeah.
less. But there's
Yeah.
opportunities to talk more, like to talk at the right moments with your customers one-to-one.
Yeah, no, this well, while you were saying that example, it maybe just think of something like I honestly really hate the term human capital, but like the truth is we are investing in these individuals. Like, shouldn't we be trying to get the most value to the business and to our end customer out of that investment? And so if we can make productivity gains in one place and then reapply the human capital that we already have in a way that's higher value to the business, that's something that we should be pursuing aggressively, I would say. And
We're
it feels
told
like
to
that
reinvest
second
our
step is less
savings
common,
or
right?
earnings. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Any good financial
No,
advisor would tell you to reinvest. And so you should
yep.
reinvest.
No, so that's a great anecdote. Okay, we've covered a lot of big topics in a pretty short period of time. We've talked about why you should even care about investing in CX, to the impact that agents have, and the fact that like really they're not going away maybe as quickly as some of the more aggressive predictions say, or even if they are or could, it may not be in the
Maybe they
best
shouldn't.
interest
Yeah.
in of the business or the customer if they should, right? Or if they did. All the way through like what actually matters and what do you do about it. But there's one, I think, really missing key component here, and something that I've seen as a theme in your research, which is to do anything with agents, you need them to adopt the new technology that
Oh,
you
yeah.
are trying to put in front of them, right? So what do organizations need to do to drive that adoption, right? Like what are the success factors? What are some of the common pitfalls that you've seen, to make sure that these investments you're making in new technology are actually successful and have the uptake needed?
Yeah. I've been throughout my career, like last like 10, 15 years, I've been working with contact center leaders and BPO leaders. And one of the things that I would say, okay, well, what's the adoption plan for, XYZ technology for your agents? And in some cases,
Right.
you like, we'll just tell them to use it. Well, that's not going to work. I'll tell you for free that that's not going to work. They won't use it. People don't like change. Nobody likes change, but
Right.
it's hard to adopt new ways of working. But the biggest challenge is that like a lot of companies aren't thinking about how to kind of fit the technology into the agent's workflow. For one of the examples I've seen, an agent was saying how their company built out some kind of like exact script that they had to follow and all these different kinds of things, and someone was asked to record it for the training video, and so they did, but they found like it's longer than the AHT that we're allowed to even have if we do it exactly as you say. Like it doesn't fit sometimes, like with the workflow, it doesn't fit with all the other things that you're asking us to do. And
Right.
so just like a misunderstanding of the agent workflow, a misunderstanding of like aligning the solutions value with the value of the agent. So like, do they care about these things?
Right.
Is it actually helping them do their work more easily? I'm sure no one would disagree with having an easier time to do their work, but is that what you're asking for? There's a lot of problems on the like organizational side, but one of the things that I think you should speak to more than me is really around the notion on the vendor side too, to make sure that like vendors are building software that agents actually want to use, that is like usable
Right.
and enjoyable to use. It's like driving value and getting their feedback and input and understanding their workflows.
Yep.
It's not a one size fits all thing. I'd love to hear a little bit about like how you guys solve that problem, how you guys approach that space.
Yeah, I mean, I think we solve it in a number of different ways, but one is just like a really aggressive focus on it in the initial deployment and implementation, right? Like
Yeah.
we want to be running pilots to understand within a given company, because every company is different and every agent population is a little bit different. What is the agent perception of the tool? So we're measuring employee satisfaction as we
Mhm.
roll out, and we typically will roll out to a small group first, get some of the hiccups out of the way, because credibility is really important too. And AI is not magic, right? And so it gets better over time. We
Mhm.
discover the unique organizational hiccups that might happen in an initial pilot, and then we overcome those and before rolling out to an entire agent population. So that's one approach, is like really understand the voice of the agent and also do a lot of testing in a smaller group before you risk losing credibility with a larger group. And we've seen really good results. I mean, typically when we do these surveys and we have that initial agent population and we say, you know, like, would you be really like upset, essentially, for, I don't have the right terminology, but would you be upset to lose Cresta? Like we get like 95 to 97% saying they would be very upset to lose this new tool because they actually feel empowered, and they feel like it was rolled out in a way that was designed with value for them in mind. I think the other point that I would just bring up here is like where agents, there's certain populations of agents that can be more resistant to like real-time agent assist, for example. And it's typically tenured agents, the ones that feel like I've got this figured out, I know what I'm doing. Like, why are you popping up all this stuff for me? Right. And I think there's two sides to that. Like, one is having the data that ties back what you're trying to do to outcomes and sort of being able to like credibly explain the why behind some of the things you're asking them to do really helps. And two, ideally, like if they're already doing the right things, there's a way to scale up or scale back the level of intervention, whether that is real-time intervention, whether that's coaching intervention. Like, you're not just going to keep coaching agents on things they're already doing exceptionally well, right?
No.
And so we should apply that concept to real-time assistance as well.
And one thing
so those are a
that I
couple
would
of things
say
we do.
to jump on that is like a lot of people will avoid bringing that kind of person into a pilot because they feel like it'll derail, you know, the enthusiasm for the project and that kind of thing. But I would give the opposite advice. If you win over that person, the person who is resistant to change, who doesn't like things when they change, getting their buy-in is the most contagious of the buy-ins that you can get in a population. It's excellent. So like blending a combination of like early adopters, people who just like love trying new things, and folks who are like, absolutely not, I hate this idea. Like having the combo pack there is super valuable.
Yep. And you know, I think just the last piece is like embed things into like a smooth workflow for them so it doesn't disrupt what they're trying to do, right?
Yeah, maybe don't make it harder.
Yeah, exactly. So from a UX perspective, just be really intentional about that design. But I think so. We're running up sort of on time here. I want to make sure that we have a bit of time for questions at the end. We're getting some good feedback in the chat here. Somebody just said, "Love the conversation." So you know, maybe we should do this more often. But, let's jump into some Q&A. And so I think this came in a little bit earlier in the conversation when we were talking about investing in CX and investing in agents. So what are some overlooked signs, you know, aside from probably from the obvious like KPIs, that an organization is under investing in the agent experience?
In the agent experience,
Mm.
attrition. I mean, if you know, if you're seeing folks leave, and like in a lot of contact centers, it's going to be like upwards of 50-something%. It's a really hard job. I've done the job. I don't know if other folks on the call have, but like I've been an agent before. It's really hard. It's hard every day. And if they don't feel supported, if they don't feel like the company has their back and is, you know, kind of like there kind of to support them in these hard conversations, they'll leave. And they should leave, right? Like that, I don't blame them. Those kinds of things, I think like people just, they are willing to, I don't know, not accept, but just they think it's kind of like well, it's always this way. It doesn't have to always be that way. The other thing I would say is like those kind of like strange, folks missing out on like sick a lot. Like that's also a hint. But from an agent experience perspective, they're going to leave. I mean, like if your tenure is very short and you're always having a rotating door of new kind of recruits, it's not a great sign. And there's a lot of things that it's really expensive to run your business that way too. So there's a lot of like good reasons to invest in the agent.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, when you're seeing that type of attrition, it puts an added stress on everybody else that is still there.
They just see their like neighbors dropping every week and they're like, well, shoot, what am I missing?
And I mean, like the new agents are often not fully productive yet. So then the tenured agents are asked to do more or take on more shit. I mean, it is kind of a bit of like an insidious cycle.
Well, it's a vicious cycle. Like, and it just keeps eating at itself until you fix it. But it's fixable.
Okay, that's fantastic. Let's see, what else do we have here? So I think this is from when we were talking about you know, exact scripts versus more
Yeah.
dynamic guidance. So this is for one I probably should have just taken in the midst of the conversation. I apologize, but this individual asked, if not a script, would you recommend a call flow of some sort? Like, can you talk a little bit about
Yeah.
what you've seen in market from these like more dynamic solutions?
Yeah. So there's going to be scenarios that you need an exact script, like I think I alluded to that earlier, where there's like, if it's compliance, it's compliance. They have to say it exactly verbatim. There's like, disclosures that they need to say. No one's arguing with that. When it comes to the like giving someone kind of a like roadmap or kind of like a GPS essentially of all of the things that you want them to hit from a behavioral standpoint, if you
Mhm.
have the data like we were talking about earlier around like when you do these things, so when you say the customer's name 3 times, or when you do all of these different behaviors, like the outcome happens. Like it doesn't really matter how you do it.
Right.
There's a lot of different ways you can get to that path, but as long as you reassure the customer, for example, or take accountability over the resolution of the issue, like a number of different behaviors that you can
Right.
like show the empathy. Um, Letting the agent figure out what feels good in their skin around like how to do that lets them keep their own kind of spin on it, lets them show humanity in a way that is valuable and that your customers will notice, but you don't want them to kind of not know what to do next. So there's that kind of like balance of supporting them but not
Right.
restricting them. I like to think about it a little bit more as like just giving them the like autonomy and like authority, frankly, to like do their job the way that they feel is appropriate and like fits well for them, but also guiding them on the things that they need to do in certain cases. So if
Right.
you in a sales program, we want you to pitch, right? Like we need you to pitch the solution. How you get there, if you have a successful outcome, that's great. But it's a delicate balance, not saying that it's an easy thing, but there are
Right.
solutions that exist that can help you kind of, it's more of like a checklist of kind of behavioral kind of touch points or
Yeah.
checkpoints versus hey, say this literally exactly,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah, I mean that's something that we've invested pretty heavily in here is the ability to recognize behaviors using large language models that can sort of
Yeah,
interpret the meaning and context of a way of doing something versus the
exactly.
exact thing that you said. So I think like the technology to be able to do this is definitely newer, right? But it is available today. Um,
Yes, it was really a pain in the butt, frankly, to do it before. And we're there now. The future has arrived, and it's a wonderful place. And that's I think that that's like the thing that I'm personally most excited about in this new era of LLMs.
Absolutely. And I think it actually ties back to adoption too. Because
Yeah.
if you have agents that are doing a good job and they're hitting their goals, and you're still telling them that you can't really exercise any sort of personality or like discretion in how you do that,
Oh.
that's a tough pill to swallow, right? I think that actually can be an attrition driver, even not just like an impediment to adoption of these types of tools.
Absolutely. It's what gives the quality teams the reputation of being like the contact center cops because they're telling you that you can't say yep, you have to say yes or whatever. It's like oh my God, like let me be my like a human being is kind of what
Yep.
the narrative from the agents is. And I mean, like I get it.
Yep. Okay, I think we have time for one last question
Yeah.
here. This one is, what is your guidance on where to start with shifting investment toward agents? And like, do you have best practices for organizations that have maybe limited resources?
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the questions in the chat was looking at another question is kind of similar. Where do people start to free up the agent to do what they're best equipped to do? And I'll answer these.
Hmm.
So I think like when we're looking at shifting investments to the agent, money's tight. That makes sense. When we're looking at the best opportunities to start with, I think the I forget if it was Brinks or Snap, but the one that reduced HT and oh no, the
Oh,
transfers.
Brinks. Yep.
The like
The transfers was Brinks. The
okay,
AHT
cool.
was
Sorry,
Snap.
everybody. You're watching me figure that out in real time. But
I
the
could have come to your assistance faster. I apologize.
anyway, but I look at like double ups, right? So like if you have a transfer problem, you also have an AHT problem, right? So like you have an
Mhm.
AHT problem because every time you transfer, you're like, okay, what can I help you with?
Right.
So if you can double that up and say like, okay, I'm gonna focus on reducing transfers because that's gonna help me from a bottom line perspective. I'm going to get that kind of like squishy, AHT like capacity space, like a little bit of a wiggle room. And then I am not going to just lay folks off, right? Like we're going to think about how we can reinvest that savings into
Right.
areas that can improve the agent in other ways, right? Like whether that's like access to knowledge to help them be able to answer customers' questions accurately, or maybe it's kind of like support throughout tricky sales conversation to handle objections, more seamlessly, just getting that kind of like support in the moment. Because it's easy to talk about it after the call, but knowing when to say the right thing is hard.
Yep.
Like those kinds of things, I think is like, if money's tight and like you don't necessarily have a surplus budget to go and newly invest in something else, tackling the areas that have kind of like knock-on effects, things like transfers, things like FCR, where you're bleeding money in a number of different ways, so that you can start, getting that like massive win that
Yep.
can reinforce a number of your other programs.
Yeah. And I mean, the things that can help you get that massive win from a cost perspective can also help you get a massive win from the customer experience
No,
perspective when we're talking
yes,
about that.
and
So, yeah.
that is there too, so that like the customer is also a beneficiary of all
Yeah.
these things. So you have like a trifecta of wins that no one
Yep.
can argue with.
Yeah, no, and it's a great answer because I think like the exact answer is going to vary by business, but
Big
your
time,
sort
yeah.
of approach point of view is find where things intersect to get the most value and tackle those
Yeah.
issues first, right?
And when you're looking at like, okay, never mind all that, I just want to look at the agent specifically, then it's about understanding the like reinforcement on the outcome, right? Like there's no point in
Yep.
going down a path that is not going to have impact on the customer experience, is not going to have impact on revenue.
Right.
So figure out like what's working, and then figure out solutions or apply solutions that can supercharge all of what you're doing well across all of your different agents. That's my kind of like other side of that, I guess, question.
I think that's a great place to leave it. And
Yeah.
we're quickly running up against the hour here, so I just want to say thank you, one, to you, Christina. This has been really, really insightful. I really appreciate all the time and really just your perspective on this. I think it's so well aligned with ours and some of the things we're trying to do from a technology perspective. So it's been great having you.
Thanks for having
Thank
me.
you very much for joining us. And thank you to our audience for spending some time in your day with Cresta. Hopefully, this was insightful. Hopefully, you learned something. But we would love to continue the conversation. So we will be in touch. One, to share the recording and the content from this webinar, but also to discuss next steps and potentially follow up and explore some of these issues that are unique to your business and show you in a very customized way how we could potentially help. So with that, thanks again, Christina. Thank you to the
Thank you.
audience, and have a great rest of your day.